Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and welcome to our landing tutorial for the fly-by-wire Airbus A380. The A380 lands a little bit different than most aircraft that you are used to. Our landing mass at the moment is around 10 tons higher than the maximum takeoff weight of a Boeing 777, and that alone tells us a lot about the energy that this aircraft carries. Now, what does that mean for our landing? Well, a good landing starts with a stabilized approach, so let's go ahead and start things from there. In the A380, we normally only use a stabilized approach gate of 1000 feet. We don't use the 500 in VMC that we are using on some smaller aircraft, but we exclusively use the 1000 feet stable gate. But when is the approach stable? So, in general, you need to be at an appropriate pitch on or within 1 dot of the glide slope and the localizer, at an appropriate speed that is within -5 to +10 knots around your approach speed target, and at a rate of descent that is appropriate to the ground speed. Normally we are looking at 700 to 800 feet a minute over here. You need to have your flaps in the landing configuration, and the landing gear needs to be out, and last but not least, the engines need to be in a thrust setting that is appropriate for the flight and for the conditions, namely not in idle. Now, let's go ahead and talk about how to manually follow the approach down. So, most approaches in the A380 are going to be ILS approaches. So I am going to explain this on the example of the ILS, however the same techniques would apply to any other aircraft as well. In general, only do very small inputs. That's the key factor to successfully landing any aircraft. I know that people on YouTube like to see pilots rape their side stick. Don't do that, okay? Do very small inputs, and that is all you need to land the aircraft. Now, if you get a deviation from the glide slope or the localizer, do a very small but appropriate input. We basically call it a positive reaction. So if you have a tiny tendency to get below the glide, just pitch up maybe half a degree and that will be sufficient. In general, don't chase the needles, but fly the aircraft. That means change the pitch as you need it in order to regain what you have on the needles. Now, let's go ahead and look ahead a little bit. And the next important factor is going to be the flare. Due to the enormous energy carried by the Airbus A380, we need to start the flare at a higher than normal altitude. Normally, we are going to start the flare 40 feet above the runway. And we flare the airplane like any other, so we pitch up around between 1 or 2 degrees, or as needed, in order to achieve a smooth touchdown. Once the radio altimeter starts counting down at 50 feet, we start to look towards the end of the runway and use our peripheral vision. That means look to the end of the runway and simply perceive what the runway is doing around you, but don't actively look at it. And then we use the radio altimeter to judge our height as we land the aircraft. Once the aircraft is down, derotate it, fly the nose wheel onto the ground, don't let it drop. When on the ground, we are going to pull the reversers and use the reversers as necessary, and verify that the brake to vacate system has engaged, so we are actively going to call BTV. Once we are rolling, we can decrease our zoom level on the nav display so that the taxi map becomes available, and that is going to show us the most important data for the BTV, namely a green line for where the aircraft is aimed to be stopped. Now, if you want to review the exit that you're going to use, you can do that down here, or rather up here on the top of the nav display. So we select the brake to vacate, 06 left, exit Bravo 6. Alright, that was a lot of theory. So let's go ahead and review the most important things. Be sure that you have a stable approach by the time you pass 1000 feet. Ensure that you remain stable on the approach, only do very small correction, and fly the aircraft based on the attitude, not by chasing any of the needles. At 40 feet, initiate your flare, and by 20 feet, ensure that your thrust levers are going to idle. Now, when the aircraft touches down, actively derotate it, and once we are on the ground, ensure speedy selection of the reverses, verify that brake to vacate has engaged, and select your nav display down to the OANS so that we can monitor our progress along the runway during the landing run, but the primary visual reference always remains outside. A last little hint over here, as we are approaching with quite a bit of crosswind. The A380 can be landed with a crab angle without any problems. However, normal procedure is to decrab the aircraft in the flare and apply a tiny bit of nose or into the wind bank angle so that you touch down with the wheel that's on the windward side of the aircraft. Today that means as we apply the rudder to the right to align the aircraft with the runway, we are going to bank slightly to the left and touch down on the left main wheel first, and that is what the flight crew technique manual recommends. Alright, so enough theory, let's go out of the active pause here and put that to the test on the approach. You can fly the approach with either the auto thrust engaged or disengaged, that is completely up to you. Many operators will demand auto thrust to remain engaged, some operators allow pilots to disengage it, and some operators require full manual flight, aka manual thrust, when you are under manual flight as well. Last but not least, let's put our point of view back to a normal point of view for the approach. So something around here, where we can just about see the bottom of the glacial panel down there. Okay, let's disengage the automatics. Cat 1. And then let's go ahead and see how the aircraft is going to behave on the landing. Again, use very small inputs everywhere, small thrust changes, small attitude changes in order to remain aligned with your approach. You can see I'm getting a tiny bit above the glide, so I'm correcting down maybe half a degree of pitch, that's all I need, and that gets me right back into the glide slope. The same into the other direction now, and this is how you fly the aircraft. Small inputs, that is absolutely all you need. Okay, land.
100 above.
Checked.
Minimum.
Continue. Again, very small corrections are all you need. And as we're approaching the flare, remember to decrab.
50.
Nothing.
40.
Flare,
30,
decrab,
20.
idle.
10. 5.
And here we are. So, maintain the center line. BTV is engaged. And then we can have a look down at the runway. And the line over here indicates us which exit we are going to make. 70 knots. Reversers going back to idle. And manual brakes.
Auto brake off.
Is checked. Okay. And then we can vacate the runway. The nominated speed for vacating the runway is 55 knots. Most operators want you to be slower than that, so 45 is normally a good speed for vacating the runway. Make sure that your entire aircraft is beyond the hold short line, otherwise you are, technically speaking, still off the runway. A common mistake amongst flight simmers is that they only take the flight deck off the runway, but not the entirety of the airplane. So, vacating the runway over here, and remember, the A380 is a long aircraft. You really want to taxi forward enough that your entire airplane is off the runway. Now, once we're off, in the real world, we keep the aircraft rolling, provided that the taxi clearance is available early enough. In the simulator, Especially while you're still learning the aircraft, I recommend to bring it to a complete stop and then do your after landing procedures while the aircraft is on the ground. However, the after landing and parking procedures are going to get their dedicated video, so thank you very much for watching. I hope that you liked this one. Be sure to leave your feedback underneath the video, and as always, like, comment and subscribe. And if you really love what I'm doing on the channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and see you all again on the next one.